evening. At Hyde Park tonight, we'll discuss about development, where the country is, what would be the viable political solution going forward, and what solutions do we have to social issues. Tonight, we've invited to our studios the former chairman of the Police Commission. He's in fact a prominent academic and he's the Professor Emeritus of Sociology at the University of Colombo, Professor Siri Hettige. Good evening and a warm welcome to our studios.
Good evening. Good to be back. Yeah.
Yes, good to have you here. Well, I will not talk to you about your former capacity as the Police Commission Chairman, but I think tonight we'll discuss about the social issues that we're facing. But to start off with, I think our viewers would love to hear about your ideas on the political scenario, because that is pretty much what's going on here. What do you think is the most viable political solution for the country going forward, if I may start off there?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is to find common ground, because we know that there are so many controversies around and there are all kinds of agitations, all kinds of political debates going on and so on and so forth. But we are actually in a situation where we just do not have the space or the luxury of basically engaging in all kinds of controversies. I think what we need is basically to settle down and get on with the job, and I think we are really in a very serious situation with respect to economic and social issues. I mean, leave out the political. I mean, of course, that is a fundamental issue, but when it comes to economic development, I think we are at a very critical juncture. I mean, we really have not been able to move forward in terms of really creating a sustainable development environment in the country.
But why would you call it a critical juncture?
Well, it is a critical juncture because we have to make certain transitions, and we cannot make those transitions unless you put in place the institutions and the policies that are very critical to enable us to really deal with those. I'll give an example. For instance, we have a very serious problem with the structure of the economy. The economy today is dominated by the services, which are very much concentrated in one small area called the Western Province. But we know we need to really and we have huge problems with social and spatial disparities. For instance, the rural-urban disparities continue to persist, and income disparities continue to persist. And then, of course, the whole issue of agriculture and the whole issue of industry. I mean, all these things are really very critical issues, and we need to really figure out how to restructure this economy so that we can make it sustainable, make it employment oriented, not just profit oriented, make money and basically sort of enjoy the privileges that few people have in urban areas. So I think we need to also strengthen the institutions that serve the public. For instance, education, health, social security systems, and so on and so forth. So I think that's why I say that we are at a critical juncture. But I don't think that we are really concentrating on these issues. I mean, the political debates are really not on these issues. Political debates are about personalities, about who is doing what, and so on and so forth. I think what we need is to concentrate on the things that matter.
I guess those discussions are driven towards such debates and dialogue rather than what is more sensible and what's more academic.
Absolutely.
Right. And Professor Hettige, if I may, I'm going back to the first question where we started our program about a viable political solution. I think what I gather from what you say is that we need to first consider a structured economy, a proper structure for the economy, for sustainable development. Is that what you're trying to say?
Absolutely. Now there is global understanding of the challenges that we all face across the world. So we cannot really isolate ourselves from that global debate. There are three big agreements that we have signed up, and sustainable development goals, which demands us to transform our social and economic environment in order to make development sustainable. And then the second is disasters. We are facing huge disasters, and disasters are increasing. And how do we really address those disasters, not in terms of disaster management, but in terms of reducing disaster risk. In other words, you have to have a whole range of institutions coming together to really make sure that we don't really have big disasters, ravaging the country all the time. We have to really make our people safer, and so on and so forth. The third, of course, is the climate change. I mean, that is a fact. Everybody agrees, and the point is that, what are we doing to really adapt ourselves to, the demands of, the global community in terms of, climate change adaptation. I mean, these are all big issues. But of course, coming back to our own situation, I think we are facing a much, smaller, I mean, maybe more not as big issues as climate change and so on. But say, for instance, the structure of the economy is the most critical issue. I mean, we have a highly distorted economy today in this country. I mean, the point is that, we talk about 3 pillars of any economy, right? We talk about agriculture. Without agriculture, you don't produce the commodities that the people need on a day-to-day basis, and agriculture therefore is probably the most important. And this is not just for a country like Sri Lanka, where there is no industrialization, where we don't have a lot of science and technology based industries and so on. But take even a country like the United States, take a country like highly developed country like Japan, take a country like Switzerland, take a country like Finland, for instance. I mean, these are countries where agriculture is considered very important. I mean, the Americans produce probably the largest agricultural surplus in the world, but they have only 3% of the people participating in agricultural activity. But the point here is that agriculture has stagnated. Agriculture has really declined in this country.
But is it because of some, I mean, what is the fundamental issue here?
No, but
is that because we haven't deployed a proper system right throughout?
Absolutely,
or is it because we have changed our policies ad hoc, in an ad hoc manner?
No, I think two issues. One is the institutional framework. We had a very, very good institutional framework for agricultural development in this country, in terms of research institutions, in terms of other institutions that deal with the problems of the farmers and so on and so forth, technology and so on, the marketing and so on and so forth. The second is the policy. I mean, where do you put emphasis? If agriculture is considered as important as industry and the services, you will really concentrate more and more on agriculture. So without concentrating on agriculture, we have to import everything that we consume. And then the second, of course, is agriculture is not just producing agricultural commodities. What do you do with the surplus that you produce? Throw it out into the garden? No, because you have to process agricultural produce. I mean, the point is agro-processing is probably the least developed in this country. You go to East Asia, go to Thailand, look at what they do. They do wonders with agricultural produce.
Right.
I mean, the fruits that they produce, major part of that is processed. And it's made available. Now, say for instance, we produce a lot of fruit. Do you have fruit juices in this country? We import fruit juices from Australia. I mean, so that's the situation. You go to a supermarket, do you see much, by way of fruit juices in produced in this country?
Of course, Professor Siri Hettige, you were talking about key issues in the economy, in the country's development process, and you were talking about agriculture, and then you moved on to talk about industry. But primarily you mentioned that the economy is at a critical junction, that is in crisis. But what do you think is the solution that we need to give here?
Well, I think we need to really look at the larger picture and see where we are in that larger picture. Say for instance, today we are voracious consumers of industrial products coming from almost every part of the world. But the point is that you have to pay for all this industrial produce that we are consuming, whether it is a luxury car used by the wealthy and the powerful, or whether it is a mobile telephone that ordinary people use on a day-to-day basis, whether it is a television set, whether it is medical equipment that health sector people use, or whether it is all kinds of things that we need in the education sector, for instance. Now, all these things are not produced here at all. We don't even have a single bicycle factory. We have 4.5 million motorbikes. we don't produce a single motorbike in this country. I mean 4.5 million motorbikes, and then 1.3 million three-wheelers. I mean, we don't produce a single, and all these cars that are clogging our roads in Colombo and elsewhere. So the point is that you cannot go on like this. We had primary industries in this country. In the 1950s, the 60s, and the early 70s, we established primary industries in all parts of the country, not just around Colombo. And we had the primary industries. Now the question is, what happened to these primary industries? They just collapsed after 1977, after liberalization. But the point is that those primary, the need for those industries did not disappear. It is just that those industries did not survive, and we have now got used to importing everything from other countries. Now say we use paper, but we don't have we had two paper factories, one in Valachene in the east, one in Abilipitiya in the south. And the textile mills that we had, Amuwatta textile mill, I remember in the early 70s when I was a student, we go past the Amuwatta mill, and that was a major thing, all these machines, humming, but the point is all that gone. You see, instead now we have these skyscrapers, occupying that, piece of land in the country. Then, you go around, we had the chemical factories, the cement factories, we had the flywoods, we had, all these factories are, I mean, the point is, I'm not saying that, we
but
can.
But a politician or somebody involved in the development process could argue that these skyscrapers and all that development that's brought forth, the development of roads is tangible development, as they may say, that is a way to develop infrastructure for the country, to bring in foreign direct investments. But what are we doing wrong here?
No, I think the question is, privatization. I'm not saying that urban development is not necessary. Actually, we have to put, things together in Colombo and, other major cities and so on and so forth. I mean, no question about it. Urban planning is one of my own areas of, work. I have written extensively on urban planning and so on, but that is not the issue. Issue is, what is the priority? I mean, do we want to have, in Colombo, a city which is, reminiscent of Dubai? I mean, do we want that, or do we want to have, a livable city? I mean, that is the challenge. Livable city is not a place where you create a heat island. You create, more, kind of livable environment with, a balance between the green environment, green, kind of spaces on the one hand, and, housing and so on and so forth. So the point is that, we have to really decide, where we want to really put our emphasis on. The point is, we still have a majority of our people living in rural areas. And, in the rural areas, there is a potential to develop not just agriculture, but also, we can produce, lot of industries, small scale industries to produce various things, as I already mentioned, agro-processing, for instance. And then,
so are you suggesting that we take Colombo, what's brought to Colombo, out of Colombo?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm basically saying that what you do in Colombo, you will continue to do, and I don't think that we can, really, prevent, this kind of development in an open economic environment. But the fact of the matter is that it is the responsibility of the state to really strike a balance between, different sectors of the economy. While you concentrate on services, you also have to concentrate on industries. You have to concentrate on, rural, agriculture and so on, so that you create a balance. Now the problem is, where are the industries now? Where are the industries? Because we have, you can't, if you don't produce industrial commodities, you have to import. And that's what we are doing now. Now we are importing. Now the point is that look at the trade balance. Trade balance, what is the trade balance today? We have a major problem with the trade deficit. We do not export enough to be able to pay for our imports, and as a result there is a huge gap. Now how do you finance that gap? We basically finance that gap by resorting to, let's say, on the one hand borrowing, on the other hand using the remittances sent by 1.6 million or odd workers, scattered all over the Middle East and in East Asia and so on and so forth. So the point is that we have to really produce enough things in this country so that we don't really have a growing trade gap, and the growing trade gap actually is pushing a lot of the issues that we are talking about. Like say for instance, today we are talking about the rupee being depreciated against the dollar and other currencies. And the point is, when importers want dollars, naturally they would put pressure on the market. When the exporters really don't really make much use of the opportunities that are available for us to export, because we don't really produce exportable commodities, naturally the trade gap is going to remain what it is, or it can continue to widen. Now, how do you address this? So, and the other thing is the services. Services are important, but the point is again the services have to be also rationalized, basically between the private and public services. Say for instance, take for instance the health sector. Now health sector is polarized today, I mean whether we like it or not, and we have a very vibrant private health sector, and we also have a very kind of basic public health sector. I mean it is very much needed because the ordinary people can't go to these private hospitals for medical care. Naturally they have to rely on publicly provided services. The same with education. I mean we have a lot of people sending their children now in and around Colombo and in other urban centers to international schools and private schools, and that is because we have really not been able to improve the educational conditions in the public system. So there is a problem there also, and and so on. And then of course the informal sector is increasing. Informal sector is expanding, but I think the problem here is that we need to promote regular employment. Regular employment.
If I may actually, before we talk about employment, you mentioned about the trade gap in terms of external trade, and then health sector and education. And if you talk about the health sector and education today, the center for a lot of political controversies, and we're widely talking about private medical education. What is your view about the current situation and the kind of tug of war?
Well, the point is that we have we have a private health sector in this country. Private health sector is probably a very, very important part of our health system today. I mean, I don't have to tell you more about it. So the point is, and we also have medical education being accessed by our prospective medical students in other countries. I mean, a lot of our students go for medical education in other countries and they come back and so on. So the point is that privatization has been part of our health landscape for the last 40 years. It did not happen yesterday. It has been going on and on. So you have the public health sector playing a very important role to provide basic health services to the ordinary people in this country. But the point is that the well-to-do people basically want better health care facilities provided by private health sector. So we have a majority of public health medical personnel functioning in the private health system as private practitioners. And then also we have a network of GPs providing private health services and so on. So it's not a question of a public system dominating the health sector. In fact it is divided between the public and the private. I think it's also true in education. I don't want to go into that at this stage. So the point is that this is a matter that has to be really sorted out, and you can't, you know, basically sort of get rid of the private element in the health sector anymore, because, you know, a lot of the people whom we see agitating, you know, basically health sector, you know, personnel, medical personnel and so on. I mean, I see all of them in private hospitals all the time. You know, I mean, I see them in corridors and they smile and go, you know, but the point is, you know, these are private hospitals providing public-private service, you know, at a fee. And of course, you know, there's the controversy about, you know, the charges and so on and so on. But the fact of the matter is that we refuse to regulate the private health sector in this country. We establish at the same with, you know, let's say for instance, we did not have the Ministry of Health. Ministry of Health would have regulated the public private health sector in keeping with certain standards.
What is the economic cost to this non-regulation aspect?
Well, I think the point is that you know, the you know, the cost of private health care is you know, is not small. You know, cost of health care is, you know, very large in this country. I think we know we have about 55% of expenditure in the health sector being private. Only about, you know, only about 49% of health expenditure is in the public sector. In other words, it is already tilted more in favor of the private.
Right.
So the point is that you know, if you go to any private hospital today, they are as crowded as public hospitals.
Sector.
I mean, you go to any of these hospitals in Colombo today, and you will see the crowds. You see, so the point is that there is a crisis in the health sector. So I think this is partly because of the failure to regulate the private health sector in this country to fall in line with the requirements of the general health system in the country. I think we have to rationalize the health sector. When we talk about the health sector, it's not just public, it is also private, because it's part and parcel of the health system today. So I think, you know, we got to be realistic, we got to find common ground. You know, we can't be just, you know, debating about this in a very emotional way anymore. I think we need to be more down to earth, realistic, take the ground realities into consideration, and then see how best we could.
More mature in our decision making.
Yeah.
And Professor, I think before we touch on the other aspects of the economy, I'd like to go back to what I mentioned earlier on. As the former chairman of the Police Commission, I think you overlooked the regulation, the operation of the Police Commission. And since of late, we talk about a lot of controversies, certain created to the police due to several incidents of violent activities taking place in society. But I shall not ask you about the role of the police, but let's talk a little about the social issues emanating from the scenarios, the situations here. What social costs do we see? What's happening to the society? What is the real situation here?
I mean, the law and order situation cannot be taken out and discussed. You know, law and order situation is part and parcel of the larger picture that we are talking about. You know, when there is, inequality in society, when there are disparities, when there are problems with respect to corruption, mismanagement, when we talk about, injustice and so on and so forth, when you don't have institutions really functioning effectively and so on and so forth, you will naturally have a chaotic environment that's what you observe. So the point is that if you expect, a very peaceful, very, violent-free environment in Sri Lanka today, you are living in a world of your own. Actually, I'm not really surprised that we have the kind of violence, kind of crime that we witness in this country today, because our institutional fabric is so weak that we have not been able to really address the issues faced by the ordinary people. I mean, take for instance, we have institutions, dealing with, lot of the issues that we are talking about. Let's say, for instance, take for instance the prison department. We have prisons. Now, you see, one of the major functions of the prisons is not to lock up people and keep them behind bars. It's also to rehabilitate them. I mean, we don't do a good job of rehabilitation, and we know a lot of the people who are sent out after maybe 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, they tend to come back, they keep coming back, and that is because the rehabilitation. So now that is the failure of the institution. That is the failure of, that is not the problem of the police, that is the problem of the rehabilitation, the prison reform ministry, prison reform sector institutions. And then of course we have the legal system. Again we have serious issues and so on, and justice system we have serious issues and so on. So I think we cannot really address one issue in isolation. We need to really look at the larger picture, and actually we just do not have the institutions that are necessary to really bring the whole picture together.
Right.
I mean,
to counter that, Professor, I think
yeah.
if you hold on to that thought, we are in the final few minutes of the program. So I'd like to throw one last question to talk about the institutional fabric that you mentioned, which needs to be brought together. But are we really organized as a nation, as an economy, as maybe state sectors, private sectors, and that entire social fabric, if we bring that together, are we organized to put policy and regulation and a proper direction for economy and development?
I think this is the biggest issue that we are facing in the country. We are really not organized as a modern society, and that is why we see so much disorganization. Sri Lanka is a society which is highly disorganized today, and that is because our institutional fabric is not effective enough to really rein in the problems that we are facing around the country. It may be in all kinds of sectors, but that is the issue. The point is that the most important institution for us today is the National Planning Outfit. National Planning Council, which we had in this country, was abolished in the late 70s, and we never re-established it. But in India they didn't do it. And India, they not only retained the National Planning Council, they in fact introduced a new council called the Knowledge Council. But we in this country, we take ad hoc decisions. It is basically knee-jerk responses that we see from policymakers. And also our politicians refuse to adopt sound policies based on evidence. They want to just do things in the most ad hoc manner. And they want to be seen as the people who really run the show. But in fact, there must be a second tier, and that is the public service and the institutions. Now you have to empower those institutions that play a very important role in various sectors and so on and so forth. So you cannot really manage a country, manage an economy in the way that you run a small tea plantation. It is a very complex environment. As we can see, all these things are interconnected and so on. We are part of the global system and so on and so forth. And our population is so highly, divided on various grounds, and we have disparities and so on. So I think, so the point is that, it is very important that we have the institutions in place.
If I may go to my first question again, does that mean we have to, is a change in the political structure needed in this case to go towards these?
Absolutely. I think, we need a political situation where, decision making is decided, based on evidence, based on facts, not on, hearsay. For instance, if the trade gap is widening, what is the reason and what do you do about it? And that is, the scientific way of looking at it. But as I already mentioned, we are not a modern society. We simply, appear to be modern in terms of our dress and, right, language and so on and so forth. But in fact, we are not a modern society. We refuse to accept the principles of a modern society. And that is why we appoint people not on the basis of their credentials, but on the basis of their personal connections. Right. You don't behave like the merit is the most important thing in a modern society. You get the right person to do the right job, but the point is that we get the wrong person to do the job, and then you make a mess of it, and then you blame somebody else. I think this, we have to basically change the way that we look at look at the way we manage public affairs in this country.
Certainly, and I think very interesting thoughts, Professor Hettige. We are glad that we had you in our studios. Thank you for that informative discussion. I wish we had more time, but we look forward for another comprehensive discussion on matters concerning the country.
I think maybe we can next time concentrate on a particular sector and discuss it, and I'll be very happy to do that. Yeah.
Great. We're glad you're extending your support and certainly being a part of the policy process of the country. We had with us Professor Emeritus of Sociology at the University of Colombo, Professor Siri Hettige, formerly the chairman of the Police Commission, and of course a part of a lot of think tank and commissions and committees and policy making process of the country. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us.
You're welcome.
Have a pleasant evening.
Yeah,
good night.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor. We had to rush.